Welcome back, scholars. We are continuing our discussion of postmodernism with Raymond Carver, probably one of the most approachable of the readers that we're going to discuss in this section. He is still different, right? Still very much in the postmodernist vein. He's something of a minimalist, falls under the postmodernist umbrella. He mixes the unrealistic with the real. Critic John Barth called it post-apocalyptic blue-collar minimalist hyper-realism. Okay, he was a recovering alcoholic and worked several jobs like janitor, sawmill hand, delivery guy, sales rep, and so on. He found his way to the Iowa Writers Conference, and afterward he taught in creative writing programs all across the country. By the time he died, his style was the most accepted in the programs and magazines around the United States. We don't see a whole lot of market for short stories these days, and Raymond Carver was a master of the short story style. There's so many other forms of entertainment, the internet, the television, radio, television, streaming media, movies, that kind of thing. That unfortunately reading short stories has kind of fallen by the wayside, and it's kind of a shame too. His characters are unremarkable people, just ordinary folks, kind of like the same thing that John Updike did. He wrote about ordinary Americans and they're living their lives. The people, they have small failures and small hopes, and they're often alcoholics. There's a toughness to his stories, though. The movie Shortcuts from some years back, based on his short stories. There was a movie a few years, probably about 5-6 years back now, called Birdman. Had can't think of the actor's name, but he was in a play at the beginning of the story, and the story was based on a Raymond Carver story called What Do We Mean When We Talk About Love. So he's made a big impact on the popular culture, was married to a poet named Tess Gallagher, whom he met at a writers' conference in 1979, shortly before the dissolution and divorce from his first wife. They actually wound up marrying around 82. They began living together around 1982, married about 6 weeks before his death in 1989. Tess Gallagher is the proctor of his literary legacy and his literary estate. So let's talk about Cathedral. Kind of a gritty story here. Just these are not people with big heroic ideals. They're not warriors or mages or sorcerers. They're just ordinary folks. And so we have our unnamed narrator, and that's no accident. The fact that he doesn't have a name is suggestive of perhaps his disconnectedness, right? We have the unknown narrator and his wife and a blind man named Robert. Now, the narrator's a pretty cynical kind of guy. We get the sense that maybe the marriage is on the rocks, or it's having difficulties. Or perhaps mostly it is that our narrator is just so disconnected from everything and everybody, right? On some level, I think he longs for connection, though, because, he's jealous of the blind man, but he actually doesn't know anything about the blind, and he's jealous of his wife's connection with the blind man because it's one that he doesn't have. Yeah, the narrator's wife, rather, and the blind man exchange tapes, and he sits there listening, kind of surreptitiously in the background, quietly, hoping to hear his name, and he never does. Yeah, and this is troubling to him. He probably suspects that there's something going on with the blind man, but on the other hand, he thinks, well, no, there probably isn't. It doesn't seem like that kind of thing. The key point of how disconnected he is from everything comes when Robert comes to visit, and he asks the narrator if he's religious, and he says, I guess I don't believe in anything, which, suggests he's even disconnected from God. When Robert and the narrator ask the narrator to describe cathedrals when they're sitting on the couch after dinner and watching watching television, which is kind of ironic here because we have a blind man watching TV with a sighted man. And he asked him to describe the cathedrals. He says he doesn't have the words. He can't figure out what to say about these cathedrals. So, in one respect, he is suffering from a kind of blindness of his own. Right? So we have, the physically blind and the emotionally blind. The cannabis. Now, this suggests, and if you look for it, there's a certain amount of religious imagery here. There's a lot of breaking of bread. There's these, and they have the two men smoke cannabis together, so which denotes a kind of communion between them. They're equals when they're on the couch together, right? The wife has gone to bed. There's nothing for him to be worried, to be jealous about. There, she's out of reach. Robert is not influencing her or taking up his time. In fact, Robert is apologetic. Said, "Oh, I'm sorry, bud. We just took up all the time jawing, and I haven't even spoken with you." And so the two men, when they figure out he can't describe a cathedral, he said, "Well, let's draw one." So they get some paper and a pen or pencil, and the two men begin drawing a church together. This is a form of connection here. It's a cathedral. It's a place where people come together and connect with God. And so we have this blind man who is connected, who is not sighted, but he has connections with Robert's wife and had a connection with his wife before she passed away. Now is sitting here with the unnamed narrator, and they're drawing a cathedral together. They're creating a church, right? They're creating a drawing of a church. And in this act, they're kind of coming together, and our unnamed narrator is actually experiencing growth. He's learning to connect with someone in a way that he hasn't before, and he finds in this very simple, very unorthodox kind of act a sense of connection, right? It's a breakthrough. With the blind man guiding his hand, and the narrator draws a cathedral, and this is like the blind literally leading the blind. Together they make a connection. The narrator breaks out of his isolation, and makes a real connection with another human being. And perhaps although it doesn't happen within the context of the story, when the wife comes down and sees what they're doing, perhaps he makes a connection with her as well. Okay, so interesting storyteller, fascinating guy, led a rough and tumble life, looked at as one of the great American storytellers of his time. This is Raymond Carver, and here's a picture of him with Tess Gallagher. And this was Cathedral. Yeah. Like I said, it's a different kind of story. At first, I kind of struggled with it, and I wondered, okay, well, that's it. What's going on? But there's a lot more here than meets the eye. It's a story about isolation and connection and jealousy and the everyday themes of the lives of ordinary people. So that is Raymond Carver's Cathedral. Hope you enjoyed the story and the video, and I'll see you next go around.